Who do you think I am, man? You fuck with me, you fucking with the best. Today, I'm gonna be analyzing a little manga called Yuureitou. So our main protagonist is Taichi Amano. He's the kind of careless faggot to make up grandiose fibs and blab too much just to get a female's attention. A lot of good that did him. And our main protagonist is Tetsuo. Tetsuo is smooth and supple and Taichi's friend. And early on in the story, you wonder if what started as a friendship might blossom into friends with life insurance. Seriously though, in the beginning, you can really sense the insecurity and the too good to be trueness of their relationship. At least from Amano's perspective, that is. I mean, the loser neat lifestyle gets old faster than you can say dick cheese. And yet, Tetsuo shows up in his life out of nowhere like, hey, break time. Today's your lucky day. I have a proposal that can turn your life around, so it's time to either get in the game or get in the closet. Also, overall, Amano is definitely the more useless of the two. He does become more useful as the series progresses though, but ironically, he also starts turning into a woman. Damn it, Julia. And meanwhile, Tetsuo comes across as really having it all together and not needing help from nobody. Except, you know what they say, every man is fighting his own battles, man. And unlike Mr. Foul Bachelor Frog himself, Tetsuo is liked by both women and men, including Amano. Despite being set in the 50s, there's still something turning the fucking frogs gay. Kinda. So this story centers around a physical building in the form of a clock tower, which is on the same property as an old mansion. Tetsuo encourages Amano to break his neat streak by getting a job here. And while attempting to do so, Amano gets curious and gets his clock cleaned and is about to make another one dirty when Tetsuo shows up and saves him with impeccable timing. Only then does he choose to reveal to Amano that this building is in fact a gigantic safe holding a tremendous treasure. And from then on, the two partner up and set out to gain access to the tower and thus the booty. Also, you'll notice that Tetsuo has a habit of withholding information and having Amano take calculated risks. Calculated by Tetsuo, that is. And then there's Dokuro Marube, who's usually just referred to as Marube. Marube is a nasty and well-connected public prosecutor who had recently bought the clock tower property. There's also Satoko Marube. She's terrified of Dokuro, who sees her as just another treasure he wants all to himself, even preemptively threatening Amano under the guise of being a protective father. Anyways, and after some difficulty, Amano manages to get some work at the Marube household, and thus gains access to the clock tower. The tower actually gets referred to more often as the Ghost Tower, because of the ghastly killer that hangs out around there, which Amano nicknamed Shinban Mushi. So Shinban Mushi kills that girl Amano likes, partly because of his big mouth, and partly because she didn't take him seriously. In general, really, but also when he warned her to stay away from the tower. Now she's dead, and Amano takes a more serious interest in unmasking Shinban Mushi, and just maybe exacting some revenge for that girl he fapped over. Another bit of backstory given about the Ghost Tower is that 2 years before the current plot, a girl named Rika had killed her stepmother by putting her on the clock, similar to what Shinban Mushi almost did to Amano. Supposedly Rika killed herself, but if not, she's probably walking around with a lot of weight on her chest. Also, she had a fiance named Shiro Hanjo, who just wouldn't take eternal friendship for an answer. Well, actually, he said he'll think about it, but it's pretty obvious he's just stalling for tits. Another semi-main recurring character is the cop, Yamashina, who ends up helping out Amano and Tetsuo several times. He likes the shape of a feminine penis, no homo, and would like to own an island full of them and other sexual chimers. You know, it would be like one of those islands in the Odyssey, except just full of normal ancient Greek people. So anyways, Tetsuo and Amano, and sometimes Yamashina, end up getting all involved in other people's business while following various leads related to the Ghost Tower. Now then, I'm gonna be analyzing this manga all in one video, but I'll still break it up into 3 chunks representing volumes 1 to 3, 4 to 6, and 7 to 9. So look below, there's a link in the description, so you can read along as we go. So I probably should have mentioned by now that Yuureitou is an extended adaptation of a mystery novel called A Woman in Grey. And I don't know about the original, but if the most prominent woman in this one is wearing grey, it's in the form of a suit. But more importantly, it's her morals that are grey. In the beginning, she burned down Amano's apartment just to further corner him into cooperating, with complete disregard for the livelihood of that horny old bag. There's many more examples, but I think it definitely makes Rika, Tetsuo, or whatever, a more interesting, less predictable character. And I mean, they stand literally no chance of getting the treasure without getting their hands dirty anyways, mainly because they're up against people like Marube and Shinban Mushi. And speaking of which, it's quite obvious early on that Marube has picked up on Amano's interest in the tower, but rather than driving him away or destroying his life, Marube tries to keep Amano relatively close and use him for his own ends. Also, I like how he mentioned Satoko before the Ghost Tower when talking about the consequences for failing at the task that he gave Amano. And you could rightfully say that whenever given the chance, this guy will use anything and anyone around him as a tool for manipulation to get things to go his way. But I mean, this is kind of out of place to begin with, as Amano isn't shown to be so much as thinking about her in that kind of way. She's obviously a pretty girl, but I think it mostly has to do with Marube projecting his own desire to devour her. At any rate, Amano and Tetsuo end up getting caught up in the troubles of the Hanjo family, which was just shy of completely pointless to their purposes, which from the beginning Tetsuo makes a half-assed attempt to point out. But at least they get good with that cop Yamashina, and Amano gets some more experience points talking to pretty girls who like guys other than him. Well, the idea of a guy anyways, but Tetsuo has some pretty good ideas. So basically, they visit an island with a 0 reported crime rate to visit the mess of a family that Rika's fiance, who again was named Shiro Hanjo, came from, and end up getting caught up in the drama surrounding a certain family tradition. By this tradition, Shiro's mother was supposed to kill herself because her husband had died, but after learning that he had cheated on her with a younger woman who was then carrying his successor, Shiro's mother did this to Little Miss Homewrecker and went on the run. And then there's Shiro's sister Shino. Shino wanted her mother to come back, and when she learned that a man named Kazuo was blackmailing her uncle over this killing, she got a little upset. And then Kazuo proceeded to attempt to use his knowledge of this murder to leverage his way into boning Shino. She gave him all the boning he could handle, and later tried to do the same to Amano to cover her tracks. This is when Tetsuo shows up and does the whole cowboy thing. That's quite an impressive shot. Not to mention for Tetsuo, who had admitted to having drunk too much alcohol not long ago. And maybe I'm overthinking this, and I don't claim to be a firearms expert, but even with a bullet that can pierce wood, wouldn't it still be much more likely to glance off a round pole like that? And why even is Tetsuo the one with a gun? As a cop, Yamashina presumably had some form of firearms training. I guess the story just really goes out of its way to make the guy look impotent. But anyways, when all was said and done on that island, their biggest influence on that family was that Shino and her mom got arrested, and they just barely got one lead out of the whole thing in the form of Dr. Tesla. And from there, one thing leads to another, as things do. And those three are forced into choosing someone with an O blood type who will die and have their organs harvested to save potentially 3 lives. Dr. Tesla forced him into this situation because he counts lives by the numbers and just can't choose who has to die himself. Like, this guy either has some kind of autism that's not on the visible spectrum, or he just doesn't like to make decisions that make him feel like he's getting his hands dirty, which he clearly is. I mean, aside from being a literal surgeon, he's just delegating. Might as well just put on a blindfold and throw darts at a phone book. It's just lucky for our little crew here that Tetsurika has a poker face of steel to take advantage of the doctor's quirk, and Tesla's own face holding out didn't hurt things either. Also, I appreciate how the manga still follows up somewhat on who gets to die. Let's hope one of these kids was molested. So at the end of these first 3 volumes, we find out that there's actually a massive dungeon under the Clock Tower mansion. We also see Shinban Mushi tie up a careless young boy and show him what happens when you play with scissors. We also see that Satoko Marube actually has some guts, and that this Shiroi guy has the guts to be a cunt, and we kinda wanna see him die. And we also see that self-sacrificing people don't fare well in the presence of said cunt. And after Amano shows up on the scene, a lot of beans get spilled at once, including the current identity of Tetsurika's fiance/BFF hopeful. The whole Shinban Mushi issue also nearly gets settled right then and there. If only Tets hadn't encouraged those two to run to the safety of the closet, they might have made the difference. But overall, the way these first 3 volumes end is pretty metal, but also pretty convenient for somebody. I mean, Shiro Hanjo seems like a pretty cool guy, and he doesn't afraid of anything, but the plot kind of needs him to get out of the way at some point. Rika never wanted that ex-pretty boy dick anyways, and it's not like Shiro was ever gonna be cool with just being friends. Amano, who is the reason we need Shiro out of the way, can definitely relate, as he comes to know that feel basically at first sight. Beta orbiter mode activated. Like seriously, it becomes kind of an all-consuming issue for a while. It should be said, Amano really does appreciate Rika's friendship. He just wants to have his cake and eat it too. Nurse Q does offer up the advice that he should just binge and get purged, but obviously Amano would just get destroyed before he could pull off anything lewd. Every man has dreams, but that's for when you're sleeping. When you wake up, it's time to take stock and stop thinking with your cock. And on that note, better to just go with the flow and accept his role as the damsel in a dress, I suppose. They actually get a sort of Bonnie and Clyde vibe going on, well, except for the part where Clyde got turned inside out in prison. So to follow up on their next big lead and to get away from the local heat, the two trek cross-country towards Tokyo, but along the way wander a little too close to somebody's territory. Some arrows are let fly and they take a tumble, and now they know why. And basically, to keep their little opium operation running smoothly, the villagers expect Amano to shit out a kid. Seeing as all the drugs and or inbreeding has made the locals infertile, they're basically buttering up Amano to become the queen of the hive is my take on it. And he might have actually been cool with it. I mean, putting aside the fact that he physically can't. If it wasn't for Rika being there in that pitiful state, getting all strung out and turned into a low-level worker bee. Of course, she could obviously have it easy and be a top-flight town bike herself if it wasn't for her little issues. So they do what they do best and solve another of the non-stop murder mysteries that seem to pop up wherever they go. In this one, it turns out that this old bag has convinced herself that she is with child, and due to the strict rules of the village regarding population size, she decided that she needed to make a kill before they throw her old ass off a cliff, just so she could have her drug-addled brains hallucination baby first. To the credit of the placebo effect though, she does have a nice glow when she starts thinking she can quit the game and make it out alive with her baby. Right up until Manji, her own grandson whom she killed, gets his revenge in the Poppy realm. Reminds me of the whole ethereal world concept from Berserk actually. If you remember, the basic idea behind that was that dreams and nightmares became tangible if you just believed hard enough, or if you went deep with certain special numbing agents. So these two finally make it to Tokyo, and as they walk and talk, Rika explains how a haircut saved her life. Or maybe that's just her way of saying it kept her from killing other people. And somehow, despite being an errand boy for a troupe of strippers, it never occurred to Rika to throw on a wig and get some of those G-string tips. I mean, if gay for pay is a thing, how hard is it to be straight for pay with a sign that says don't touch the girls? It seems like she hasn't even decided what she likes at this point, so what's so hard about jiggling what she has? There's like a whole dimension of choices that could help her achieve her goals, but what she refuses to make. So Tetsuo, or whatever she's going by now, is really kind of a stick in the mud. I mean, look at Amano. He dresses for success, whatever that means at a given time. And on a somewhat related note, Marube is the man with too many fetishes. Marube, you dog. For all you know, he's a married man. And it's a good thing Marube has trouble feeling anything, cause whenever he gets passionate about something, he tends to leave a trail of people who piss themselves in his wake, which is probably just another fetish of his. The man's an animal, and as it turns out, Satoko's mom wants to live on an animal farm, that slut. Also, Marube probably actually isn't Satoko's father, so his whole checking her chastity stick was probably more about the jailbait weight than incest. But anyways, Satoko's mom happens to be heavily involved in the Ghost Tower plot, having literally wrote the book on it. She wants the money in order to start the world's greatest theme park. Also, she has the precious beetle thing that will somehow open the way to the treasure. Satoko's mom also has several male friends, any one of which could be her real father. Did I mention her mom's a slut? And one of these friends tries to drag Satoko off to the shed where he can do communist stuff, like making her work for free, if you know what I mean. And for possibly the first time ever, Marube shows that he's willing to risk his own neck for his favorite porcelain doll, although what he really wants is still the package deal with the clock tower treasure. So it's hard to say at this point if Satoko isn't just a means to an end for Marube. Sure, he let her have a little line, but then he jumps back in at a time when Satoko is feeling very isolated and vulnerable to score some big daddy points. And who's to say he wouldn't cast her aside in an instant if he stood to benefit? After all, a man like Marube can always find another LG to creep on. Basically, both her supposed parental figures are trying to get one over on the other, and Satoko feels the strain of being pulled in two different directions by people who don't seem to care about her. But fortunately for poor little Satoko, it isn't long before she gets to hang out with the cross-dressers. Also, where does this come from? Does she think that's like a purely clinical form of humiliation? Anyway, so Shinban Mushi gets on the scene and starts killing communists one after the other in an orderly fashion. Now they can finally have their promised utopia where everyone is equal or whatever. Except for serious-faced Mun-san, that is. Even with the element of surprise, Mushi couldn't land a killing blow on Mun. After all, Mun has the coldness and rage of a man who's lost almost everything dear to him, including more recently their communal side chick. He's getting the best of Shinban, but then the Mushi mask comes off. And just look at Mun's face when he still has no face. And on the topic of faces, Mushi is convinced that his true face, not necessarily his real face, is one that only fellow monsters could appreciate, and he wants Rika to know that feel. And while he's sharing these intentions with Rika, Marube makes his move and targets Rika's weak point, Amano basically, complete with his dolled up package. Marube does have quite a way of manipulating others. He's got a full deck of fetishes, and he just went and dealt himself a full house. The more interesting dynamic at this point though is the way that we see Amano and Rika keeping things from each other, both for their own semi-selfish reasons. In Amano's case, keeping his secret dealings with Marube to himself only worsened their situation. Doesn't he know that the house always wins? But at least when it comes time to go for the treasure, Marube provides a good amount of trap fodder to better their odds. And they go with the buddy system, with Tetsuo offering to partner up with Marube. With those two putting their heads together, they can surely reverse engineer any traps. And Amano goes down with Yamashina, who reveals he is the lover of athletic young boys, which is frankly just distracting and inappropriate at a time when they're trying to play the worst game of musical chairs ever. And I'm not someone who likes to throw around the word inappropriate in these times when it's so often used with inappropriate or just without even explaining the context. I find it quite problematic basically. Well, either way, they have a good cry and hug it out just as the music starts. At this rate, if I was on one of those teams, I'd try to get a bucket of red paint. That way I could try and claim like half the floor space in that dungeon. Marube would agree that one man's trap is another's treasure. He and Shinban Mushi both seem more interested in the companionship of Rika than pretty little Amano though.
Moving. You fingering my ass, man!
So in the last 3 volumes of Yuureitou, one thing that definitely sticks out is the massive amounts of character development. I mean, it has actually been quite steady and consistent up to this point, but now it's like every bit of pressure is turning these people from rocks of various compositions into gemstones. Except for Marube, he's more like the accumulation of polluted seafloor sediment to form a pearl. So anyways, let's talk a bit about these characters. Yamashina already spilled the beans about his whole boy obsession. In reality, his may just be a case of grief-induced pedophilia, if that is a real thing that I didn't didn't just make up. And in fact, let's just give him the benefit of the doubt and call it endophilia. But yeah, if only he was born in a different era, he could make do with eunuchs. On his ancient Greek island, that is. Seriously though, I have an okay idea of how homo relationships generally seem to function. At least if historical sources are any good. It's simple really, you still have a masculine and a feminine role. And generally speaking, the younger, aka more boyish partner takes on the more feminine and passive role. Which of course would imply that Mr. Responsible Gun Ownership himself has an inclination to take on the more masculine role. Maybe it has something to do with his having felt inferior around this athletic friend of his. I mean, the most masculine thing about the guy is that unlike Amano, he's at a degree of self-reliance from the beginning, mostly owing to his ability to think and smooth talk at Tetsuo's pace. At least we knew he could before the brain damage. So maybe now it's finally his turn to be the Twinkie. Now all things considered, Amano did pretty well and he came pretty far. He may have even started to get a little too used to the carnage at the end there though. It's not like he's always gonna get a chance to do his little home run derby sneak attack. He also honestly looks better in the dress, which I do think was a conscious choice of the artist of this manga. I mean, the next thing you see him wearing makes him look like some kind of faggot wizard who has wet dreams about being bullied, which is fine, but not nearly as aesthetic. Whatever though, the man's a famous detective now, and a veteran of the semi-final showdown with Shinban Mushi, whom he defeated with the old put the bullet in the fourth chamber to trick him into getting closer so you have an easier shot trick. Although it really didn't make much sense why after doing this he didn't just shoot right away, and instead expected the inspector to realize what he did at the last moment, and just assume that he would stop his knife attack as a result. And just look at how his hand is almost directly beneath the gun here, considering how Shinban beat Mun, who was armed with a knife and who remembered the basics of CQC. Amano is one blink away from being disarmed and whatever else Mushi feels like cutting off. But yeah, as far as detective skills go, Amano actually does have a pretty intense ability to notice details, and not just the more obvious details, like when he noticed his old senpai and his body just moved on its own. He even put together the real identity of Shinban Mushi. Not that it really mattered at that point though. It would just take a quick head count after kicking Mushi off the cliff. You won't need dental records for that. I do find it to be kind of a letdown though. I mean, this inspector didn't really get enough screen time, so to speak, for me to really care that it's him. I think it would have been more jarring if only his cover persona was given more care. In other words, if he did more hiding in plain sight. I mean, aside from the Mushi moments, he went straight from a persona built around a mustache to a memory. Well, he did kinda come back, only to be thrown out the window like medieval trash. And now let's talk about Tetsuo. Rika, Mitsuo, Rei, Akira, student to boy. So the more I learn about the world, the more I realize there's a lot of pseudo-scientific babble floating around. But if there really is such a thing as penis envy, she's got a hair trigger. I mean, it may be out of focus here, but you can see enough of what is clearly leg for that panel to pass as a moderately bushy vagina if you took it out of context. But hey, let's give Amano the benefit of the doubt too, and say that Mushi tucked it between his legs and tied it in behind to keep Amano from moving his hips too much. Anyways, that deadpan sexual Marube provides some illumination on what exactly Rika is trying to be. She's got Peter Pan syndrome basically. She wants to be a boy but not a man. Marube really seems to have figured out just about everything about our main characters, which might have been helped by the fact that his own issues aren't too dissimilar from Rika's. Through Satoko, he wanted to be the little girl, followed by the pure maiden, and he's a fair bit more ambitious about it than Tetsurika, whom he wants to have in more ways than one for her female qualities. And it turns out that he's her dad, which is also significant in more ways than just him being a perv. But to put the focus back on Tetsurika Kirare, her real mom, the real woman in gray, pretty much looked exactly like her. And aside from obviously blood, that's really just about their only connection. And that's mostly Marube's concern. The woman who adopted Rika at age 10 on the other hand, wanted her for her qualities as a pretty young girl, probably so she could later marry her off to some rich family and reap the benefits. Problem was, she really was like a boy, and that was amazing and all, but it really wasn't the return on investment that her stepmom had sought. Also, she made Rika scream like a little girl, and that's why she's dead. Cause Akira is nobody's house pet, she's a wild hare. Now as for Marube, as I mentioned, he wanted to bring a whole new meaning to the term wincest. To achieve his goals, he would lift up his skirt and stick his dick wherever he needs to, all to basically be one with Onatsu, his one main chick that he failed to replace with 1,000 cheap fetishes. As for Satoko, she's normal, and luckily for her, she didn't inherit her mom's communist slut traits. Actually, Dokuru really did nurture a lot of traits in Satoko that would prove useful for her, such as showing her how to get things done in business and how to be a high-maintenance princess who still knows the value of $1. One thing he surprisingly didn't teach her was how to get loved tenderly. You gotta wonder if at this time she felt some sense of relief now that it was finally about to happen, and with no pretenses of fatherly love, and no dragging everything way out while living vicariously through the excitement of a quivering young miss. But anyways, it would have been convenient if she had simply got with Amano in the end, but her saying his name first in this panel is about as close as she ever got to the thought. So much for manning up. Satoko really is a young miss, who only has eyes for pretty boys and tough guys with apps. Or maybe Amano just failed to pass some covert does he have a dick test that she orchestrated at some point. But yeah, that cyborg Harada is that cop who Deku got his arm sliced up real good and was presumed dead by most of the characters up till now. He once again saves Satoko, this time from getting her legs busted up. Fuck that other guy though, I guess. It looks like Harada just can't get it up for his old cop buddy. Of course by it, I mean his fighting spirit. But hey, at least he's not a sneaky coward like some buddies. And at least he likes girls, so Satoko can feel the power. That girl is straight up disgusted by a man she can't sway with her body. So as far as the ending, like Amano pointed out to Marube, happy ever endings aren't really endings at all. They're just feel-good, brain-numbing pieces of low-effort fiction. Still, Marube achieved the closest thing to it, getting the ever after part down at least. So Amano sets about promoting acceptance of different configurations and such. And as you can see, he now has the kind of resolve to do what it takes to open those doors for what was originally Yamashina's plan. So while Amano busies himself with things like appropriating the rainbow, and apparently giving up on all the women he had earlier assumed were on their way, Akira, who goes by Tetsuo in front of Amano for old time's sake, shows up back in his life, and this is all we get for a final relationship status. So it's like, what are they gonna do? The most obvious answer would have to be Tet strapping on some phallic implement and just going to town. And just maybe permitting Amano to hump her leg to completion on his birthday. Anyways guys, that about does it for this one. Until next time, this is Sassy saying, keep your nipples where I can see them.
Amano.